Good morning and welcome to the Liip, the Leadership in Insurance podcast. Today I'm joined by Naby Mariyam, who is the CEO and founder of Coverhero. It's an Insurtech that I've watched for quite some time. She's very prominent on the social media and has been really sort of on some good panels and had some interesting things to say. So I'm really pleased to welcome her as the first guest to the Liip. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me as the first guest. I don't have to match with the people before me, so I'm quite pleased with that.
That's a very positive way of looking at it. The other way is to say you're the guinea pig. So thank you for doing it.
Happy to be guinea pig as well.
So I wanted to sort of, obviously I've followed your journey, but not everyone out there is necessarily going to. So it'd be really good to hear a little bit from you about your kind of journey into sort of Coverhero, because you don't come from what we terms of maybe a traditional insurance background. Is that right?
Yeah, I come from academia. I started in academia when I was 18. I was a university lecturer from a very, very young age. Wow. So I spent about good 15 years in academia across the board. Was at very senior level position here in Sydney and kind of had an existential crisis. Then I left academia and went into entrepreneurship. So I ventured out to create a documentary series about the Maldives to bring attention to climate change and the impact of climate change on island nations. And that was my first entrepreneurial project. And with no background in documentary production, I convinced a very prominent producer here in Australia to produce the show with me. So I got on a plane, took my son, put everything on a credit card, hired a camera crew and filmed a sizzle reel and came back and edited and wrote a book and did a whole photo shoot of the book as well. And we tried to sell it to one of the networks here and they said no. They were like, you don't have a commercial face and a profile. I'm like, have you seen this face? Like, seriously? and I was like, okay, there's a lot of barriers to entry here. So I kind of parked that and then went into tech after having no technology background. This was about 9 years ago now. And I started building an accommodation booking platform for the Maldives, and that kind of didn't work out. Then in 2015, I launched Australia's first rideshare platform for kids called Ride Hero, because I have a son who plays football, or they say soccer here in Australia, and a huge fan of Messi. So I had to always take him to football practices, and I was like, can't do this, can't work full time and take him to, 5-10 practices a week. So I started a platform to solve that problem, which was kind of organically grew, and I bootstrapped the company and kind of had a bit of a burnout, as a lot of founders do when they put all in and work 90 odd hours a week, which is not very sustainable. So then I moved to London for a little bit. So I was in London and I was speaking to a lot of fintechs at Google campus and really loved London. And then came back and I was working in management consulting for a little bit because I needed to recover from losing so much money that I poured into my previous startup. And while I was working in that role, I had a very traumatic life experience. A very close person to me got cancer, and that led me to lodge a whole bunch of insurance claims that got rejected. And the whole process was quite traumatic combined with my personal life experience. So that kind of motivated me to look into the insurance, say, how can things be like this in this day and age? So it came from a place of personal kind of angst around how challenging it was. And if I was the one that went through it, I'm pretty sure there are thousands, if not millions of people that will have to deal with it. So we applied for an accelerator program here in 2017, which was Qantas Avro Accelerator. Yeah. So we got into the program, and that's kind of how it started. And we finished the program, and I then bootstrapped the company in 2018, traveled pretty much all around the world, spent a lot of time in Germany and New York speaking to other Insurtech startups and VCs. And
I wanted to ask you about accelerator programs, because outside looking in, they look slightly terrifying. And I speak to lots of senior insurance professionals that are fascinated by the Insurtech industry. I think most people, like everyone's got one good book in them or one film they can write. I think everyone in insurance now seems to think they've got one good Insurtech in them. What was that experience like? Would you recommend it? Because they look like sort of a bit of a sort of quite an aggressive running of the gauntlet. So yeah, what's your experience with kind of the accelerator pitching program?
Every accelerator is different. So I have been through 3 accelerator programs of various different types. In fact, I worked for United Nations Development Project in designing accelerator programs to drive innovation in developing countries. So being on both sides of being a participant and also designing and running accelerator programs as well. I think it is very good for new founders that have not built a startup before. It gives you a structure, it gives you the right kind of mindset, and you learn a lot about moving quickly and testing and validating your ideas and getting traction, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are more scale-up programs which are very good for startups that already have a product, got a little bit of traction, is looking to commercialize, especially in the enterprise space. So in 2019, we were in plug and play Insurtech accelerator program in Silicon Valley that was really intense. I spent about seven months just traveling between Sydney and San Francisco. I spent 1 week there and 3 weeks back in Sydney. So that was really intense, build network and commercialization. And then this year we were in the Singapore Insurtech program with plug and play as well. So accelerators are great if you have the energy to move forward and really absorb it. Startups that work really hard and hustle really hard will get a lot of benefit from the accelerators. But if you don't do the work, it's just, it's a waste of time. So It's up to the teams to make the best out of it.
Yeah. How did you balance that with family life? Because you said you've got a relatively young son. Was that must have been quite challenging?
It was very challenging. So I have a very interesting story, but something that I very openly speak about, which is also the philosophy of Coverhero, is to enable future generations and our generations to live a balanced life, have financial well-being, physical well-being, and mental well-being. And that's because in 2018, when I was bootstrapping my company, I went through this really challenging period. We ran out of money in the company, and it got to a point where I couldn't even pay my own bills, and my son and I would sit and count to buy bread, count coins to buy bread. So it was extremely challenging, and that took me down the path of anxiety and massive depression, and I had to change something about my life to get out of that. And so I lost my apartment. I moved in with my best friend, and my son went back to his dad because I had to move really far away from his school. And then for 18 months, I was, rebuilding my company, rebuilding myself. And about a month and a half ago, I got my own place and managed to have my child back again with me. So that was really amazing. So that was huge sacrifice.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the level of commitment that we don't hear about very often. I think people like to talk about techs, particularly tech startups, but I think startup like community in general, when we're following this kind of, I don't know, like entrepreneurial porn is what I want to say, the Gary Vaynerchuk's of this world. And I think people like Gary Vaynerchuk, he talks about a lot of the practicalities of it. But I think people are very quick to kind of ignore those bits and focus on the money and the ego of owning your own company. But, I had a similar story. I've worked for myself, have done for a long time. But when I first started, I remember I got down to the point where if I didn't make money that month, I couldn't pay my rent. And it was like, okay. And I fortunately, I was a bit luckier in that I literally signed on the dotted line for something that paid my rent that month. But my client couldn't understand why I wanted them to pay so quickly. But I was like, I really don't want to lose my flat. But nobody talks about that. People like talking about the sort of exciting bits. So, thanks for sharing that, because I think that's as important as anything else, particularly when talking about startups. We touched on something as well. You were talking about bootstrapping. I've got quite strong views on this, but I wanted to hear your view on kind of investment and attracting investment. And can it be do you think it can be a bit of a poison chalice at times? Because that's certainly a bit of my view.
It depends on the startup, and it depends on how much you want to invest into the startup. One thing I can say, capital raising is a very time-consuming endeavor. Yeah. If I could, I would not raise capital, but the capital is required to grow and scale the business. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the money that comes from investments. It is the opportunity to scale and being plugged in to the networks that can open doors and accelerate the growth of the company. Mm-hmm. That is the value that I see in raising money from VCs, is the wealth of knowledge and expertise that they can bring to the table, and the doors that you can that can be opened for the business, because it'll take a long time. As you know, networks are very powerful and networks are very cliquey as well. So to get into a network is really hard. And I look at it is an investment from a sales perspective. And that is the framing that I have, is by raising money from strategic investors, it would help the company grow a lot faster and having the capital to be able to execute. But you have to balance the time that is spent on raising and not doing half-assed capital raise, right? Like if you want to do a capital raise, be fully committed, prepare the documentation, understand what's required, and go all in and go hard, and to find out whether you can raise money or you will get some really good critical feedback.
Because one thing that I've seen is that I compared it to going public. As soon as you float a company, you are beholden to shareholders, which are external to the management of a company. A shareholder wants return, and management might want to grow in certain ways. And it's a bit like, I feel if you attract too much investment or the wrong investment and the wrong investors, they're pushing for that return, that massive multiple. And let's say you've got a specific niche within the insurance market. Your USP is that niche. But to provide the return required, you may have to kind of dilute that niche and go into other areas. And then you kind of lose your USP as a proposition. So it definitely seems to be a kind of real tightrope between getting the right investment, the right level, but certainly the right investors. Because that goes to kind of team as well. So you got horribly cut off when we were talking about Coverhero. So I want to ask you obviously specifically about that. So am I right in thinking, so Coverhero set up more as a platform, and Hustle Cover is the product that you're currently offering? So it'd be good to hear about kind of Coverhero as it is now, obviously the product you've got, and then obviously where you sort of see that expanding as we go forward.
Yeah, so we designed the technology, and our platform's called Cloud Cover that powers our product Hustle, which is targeted at the contingent workforce, which is expected to be about, I think, $4 billion in 2025, which is growing rapidly. So it is a segment that requires various different financial services to cater to the specific needs of the segment. So the technology powers the product, but we also partner with Agile underwriting here in Sydney, who's our capacity provider, which is also Lloyd's cover holder. So it's a very collaborative relationship that we have in designing the product and working together to bring the product to the end user.
So how have you found that interacting with, the traditional insurance market? Because certainly something that I have to push back on when people are trying to get into Insurtech is that I have to say, you've got to understand that Insurtechs are tech businesses that happen to be in the insurance space. they're not necessarily insurance businesses. So the skill sets are kind of not the same. So what's been your experience of that kind of traditional insurance market?
Consistently, the traditional insurers are very risk averse. So that's the number one thing. Secondly, their core business isn't technology, their core business is insurance, and therefore the understanding or the creativity across the business units are different. And then thirdly, because the businesses are so big and there is so much internal fragmentation, the incumbents or the decision makers don't have the full control across the value chain within the organization. For example, the underwriting teams or the compliance or the marketing, they're all very, very separate from each other. So the amount of people that is required to sign off on a venture or an avenue takes a very, very long time, and they don't move at the same speed as startups, don't have the same level of urgency. They still have to continue to grow their existing portfolio. So spending time into building a new segment for the incumbents and working together with startups is generally around how many zeros are you going to bring in. So it's very revenue driven. So the nature of innovation is it's a long-term play. The early days, for example, trying to find capacity providers, the first question that they would ask is how much gross written premium are you going to bring in? And if it is under 5 mil or 10 mil, which a company that is starting would not be able to do, then the sign off doesn't come through. And finding the right partners is like finding a needle in a haystack. But they're out there. They're definitely out there. It's challenging to find. You have to have a lot of phone calls and conversations to find the right fit that understands, and the key stakeholders within the organizations have to champion that. And when you meet those companies and those people, then magic happens. Otherwise, it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, definitely. And have you found that with Agile? Because I don't know Agile that well, but obviously look them up on the process, and they seem to kind of promote a lot of like technology themselves, you know.
They're amazing. I mean, founder of Agile, Ben Webster, is also one of the founders of Insurtech Australia, and his team are doing a lot in driving and building the ecosystem here. So work very closely with the team at Agile, and Adam from Agile. Big shout out to Adam for all of the support and working together. And we have a long way to go as well, and massive learning curve, and the guidance and support and continued outlook on understanding that it is a learning process, and it's a testing and learning and iterating process and continuously improving. So it's been really, really great, and we're very grateful that we found a really great partner to work with, because we had an experience where we were working with one of the partners and it wasn't a great fit, so they set us back 6 months and then we had to start again. So very grateful for the work that Agile does in the ecosystem, empowering Insurtechs.
Yeah, and I wanted to pick up on something you said about innovation, because something that we've seen during the pandemic has been a sort of instant like retraction on the kind of innovation teams within like some of the big insurers. If we look at things that have happened, like Lumen Labs has shut down from MetLife, or is at least winding up, and then we've had Blackboard with AIG. They've shut down and they've just retracted into their core. So like culturally, it seems that the big insurers still kind of struggle with the kind of concept of innovation on any sort of long-term plan. And I don't know if you've observed that, but certainly, I suppose it always goes back to the same thing. These successful big insurance businesses are so large that, it's the equivalent of trying to turn an oil tanker. And I'm not sure how committed some of them are long-term to the concept of innovation. So do you see like Insurtech in some degree as like a external third party innovation pool or ecosystem that the insurance market can invest in, but doesn't have to kind of bring on board and on site itself?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. And one of the key cultural fundamental differences about the insurance industry is it's not an industry that has a culture of innovation, and it is just starting. So it was very much doing the same thing for a very, very long time, and for good reason, because the numbers were looking good and the businesses are profitable. So why change if it's not broken, right? So innovation seems to be a cost to the business rather than an investment, because the short-term returns aren't coming through early on. And that long-term commitment to building something internally, and then the commitment or the champions within the business might change, and the directive might come from the top. The board may decide a different strategy, and if it's a listed company, there's all of these internal challenges that big companies have that we don't have. We like jet skis. We can change the course very, very quickly on an hourly basis sometimes, but they don't have those things. So even if they're great champions within the business units, if there's a directive from the top to change the course, then that happens. And I hope that the industry has a cultural shift within the organizations, that there are bold leaders inside the organizations that would fight for innovation, and justify that as a long-term investment, and not cut down the investments into innovation and drive it. And this is the time to innovate, because what COVID and this pandemic has shown us is the value of being prepared for something like this. Going fully remote and being digital. For startups, that's easy because it's just business as usual for us. Nothing really changed. But for a large organization with thousands of employees that weren't set up to go remote, the cybersecurity threats or the workplace well-being or having that culture, I would hate to be CEO of a large organization in this current time. So kudos to doing what they can, and I think it is not the time to point fingers, but also recognize that they need to do something differently.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting. I mean, obviously my role is every day talking to different businesses, and some have responded really positively. They were set up, they had a sort of crisis plan, and it just kicked into action. And we can see that by their activity. They just continued to hire, they onboarded remotely, they just sent out laptops and technology to people and said, welcome. Some had to kind of make that happen, and then they couldn't get their hand on technology or laptops, for example, and they couldn't get it going. But then the other thing that happened was it was more cultural. Some people would not hire someone that they couldn't meet face to face, and you had to have these awkward conversations going, we don't know when we're going to be able to meet face to face. So you either kind of continue doing business and growing, or you say we'll wait until this unknown date, and then it becomes out of your control. So I think the cultural things, is incredibly. It's been highlighted, in this instant, and different companies are reacting very different, even if they're of the same size. So yeah, it's definitely been very challenging. And on culture, I wanted to talk to you because you've been involved in several startups. How do you build a team in a startup? Because you're selling a vision, right? You're selling an idea, because it's not necessarily the money, the glamour, or the sort of 9-to-5 lifestyle. So
yeah,
how do you go about doing that? And, how have you gone about building your team today?
So for me, it's about the key values of the company, and creating a culture that I want to spend a lot of time being part of, and walking the talk. And it's not just a brand building activity. So one of the key things is, strive for excellence, but not perfection. Within the team environment, and give 100%. If you can't give 100%, take a break. look after your own well-being, because if you don't have a good handle on yourself and your life, because the lines of work and life are so blurred now, having a culture where all of those things are checked and very integrated is really integral to building a team. And the other thing, in team dynamics, something that we do is the element of creativity. And what drives creativity? Creativity would not happen under pressure. As my son would say, "Mom, amygdala hijack." That's what he says when he is stressed out. So technically your brain is hijacked when you're under extreme stress. You have, massive adrenaline and cortisol in your body, and therefore you're not going to be able to come up with new ideas. So balancing the levels of stress and understanding the levels of stress and creating free flow of ideas, and that comes with fun. We have never come up with an idea by sitting inside a boardroom, and the ideas come in the most awkward places at the most random times, just out of the blue, and that is the flow. And keeping that flow is really critical to constantly innovate. And it's not going into, let's sit down and brainstorm new ideas. It has never happened like that. And it's always bouncing ideas off, especially with my CTO, who's Praveen. We used to, before lockdown, we used to have lunch every week on a Friday, when we will go to one of our favorite places, and we sit down and looking at the sunset in Sydney, which is really magical. And we would just chat and float ideas and bounce ideas. And off the back of it, Hustle was born. And then some of the other products that we're working on, strategy and some campaigns, and all of these things just organically happen. And I want to cultivate that culture, that as we grow and as we scale, to have that culture of creativity. And the way to do that is to create psychological safety within a team environment, where you use a scientific and a very diagnostic approach to identify problems and solve problems. So having a no shame, no blame, and a no fear culture that allows people to make mistakes, but have an intolerance to not know why the mistake happened. So very objectively looking at processes and understanding those processes and improving them, because it's okay to make mistakes, and through mistakes we learn a lot. But repeating the same mistakes over and over again is very costly for the team and for everybody that's involved. So it's just those balancing acts. And the bigger the team gets, the harder it is. So instilling those cultural values and reiterating the culture and constantly living that is a critical part of that team dynamics.
Because do you think we overcomplicate communication within businesses? Because what you've just said there is like, it's such a human thing. You said we talk, we challenge each other. You and your CTO go and have lunch. Obviously not now, but you can have lunch together, and that's such a human, obvious, simple solution to kind of some of these challenges. And I know you've done some stuff on, before this part of your career, you worked as a management consultant looking at kind of communication within teams and building successful teams. So do we overcomplicate communication in business, do you think?
I think we need to become more human and look at what do you want for yourself, and how do you unlock your own creativity. And if we can empower every individual to get themselves out of the way, driven, and then follow a vision and very strategic approach, and allow people to work the way they want to work, but have clear objectives and goals, and rather than going from this 9 to 5 show up kind of thinking, to we're solving problem X and we want to solve it in Y time period. And let's all get together and work together to do that. So we work in sprints. So there are 4 sprints in a year. In every sprint, there is a goal. There's one big goal, and then breaking it down. Okay, and working backwards, what do we need to do in order to achieve that goal? And sometimes it changes, but there is like every sprint will have a core functionality, whether it's a tech that we're going to do or whether it's around marketing, because we can't do everything all at once. There are lots of trade-offs that we have to make.
Yeah.
And I like to think that having accountability is very important. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to measure. And if you can't measure something, you can't optimize it. So having that very scientific approach to being able to measure is really important. And having fun is really critical. Allowing people to have fun without being scared and being able to speak up directly. I'm very, very direct, and sometimes to my detriment as well. I'm very direct with my communication and say what's on my mind. And I think that's really important to have direct conversations.
I think direct's got a really sort of has like quite negative connotations, and it's quite funny. As soon as you said direct, I instantly got slightly terrified. I went, oh, but I think you're right, because I am actually direct, and I think when I'm not communicating well is when I'm not being direct, or I'm not being myself. You know, I spent a long time, and I think certainly within business, you can fall into a culture of appearing how people want you to appear, you know, even down to how people dress, you know. And I know business dress has changed. For example, I nearly turned up with my FinPro. I've got a hoodie because I had to go work on site at a software company once, and I realized as soon as I wore my suit, I was like, oh no, I can't wear this. But it was quite funny because they were going, oh, well, you can't wear that. But I thought, yeah, but now I feel like I need to come in your uniform. And your uniform is everyone sitting with a black hoodie, like hacker hoodie. And, you know, so I said I was swapping one uniform for another. But when people are themselves and when people are direct, nothing gets lost in communication. Of course, as you alluded to, there is a balance. Sometimes people need you to be a bit sort of sensitive to how direct you can be. But I think even then, you've got a point to work from, can't you? Because everyone knows where they stand. How do you think you're going to carry that culture forward when you grow the business and there's more people? Have you thought about ways to kind of continue that culture of kind of clarity and communication?
I think, you know, the first 15 people are absolutely critical for the business and living and breathing the culture, because they would go out and build the teams.
Yeah.
And having team rituals are very important as the company grows. Like if we look at families, right? Rituals are really powerful. If you have a morning ritual, afternoon, evening, holiday rituals, that kind of grounds us and brings people together, working towards a certain goal. And having those rituals, whether it's a little ritual or something big that you do, brings people. It's kind of like being on a ship and you're at the what is the equivalent of a steering wheel on a ship? I can't remember the word, but you know what I'm saying?
I know what you mean, yeah.
So you're navigating the ship and you're looking ahead, and there is the ocean, there is the wind. Yeah. And you have to navigate through those two external factors. And the people on the team, let's say if you're sailing, you will have to have everybody believe in the destination that you're going, and you get hit by a storm, you don't throw the people out onto the ocean. You want to make sure that you're navigating and going through the storm together, but the captain of the ship needs to have absolute clarity on the destination. Yeah. And how they're going to get there. And during a storm, the most important thing is to protect the team, right? Make sure that people are not destroyed during that storm. You come out of the storm, and then it's smooth sailing after that. So it's just having that culture of knowing that no one person is bigger than the team. And as the team grows, instilling that culture and living that culture. I think writing a document about the culture isn't going to build culture.
No, yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a lot of value statements and, you know, cultural statements people make, which are just have no basis in reality, and they're a marketing tool. They're something that's been made up in a boardroom, as you say, and it's what I find sad and unusual about that is that you can find out your values by talking to your business. You know, talk to the people in your business, go, what are our values? Like, what are the things you find important? So, you know, and you, from that, you might find things you don't like, but that's something to address and change. But what you will find is that there will be commonalities, there will be values, and then you have to hold those things dear. I mean, if your company's not doing very well, those things you might want to change. But if your company's doing great, you ask the people, and they'll probably tell you why. Conscious of all the time, so we sort of start to kind of move things towards a conclusion. But I wanted to sort of ask about how you found the people that work with your business now. How did you find your CTO? And are you going to kind of continue to use the sort of same attraction strategies? You know, how are you going to go about bringing people into your team?
So my CTO was a very interesting story. I had in 2018, I had just returned from New York, and in Sydney there is a startup hub. So I walked into the startup hub and I ran into a girlfriend who was who I haven't seen in a long time, and she made the intro to Praveen, and we started chatting. And I started pitching because I had like all this New York energy in me, and we clicked. And I said, you know, I'm looking for someone to build a product for me. And then he sat down and he started working straight away. So it was just like a magical connection that happened. So then I went to London again, exploring opportunities with insurers, and I came back and I gave him a call and I said, hey dude, what are you doing right now? So he had just finished a project, on a data science project for the government. And I said, do you have time? Do you have 12 weeks that you can commit to helping me build this? And he said, yeah, sure. And I said, I don't have a lot of money to give you, but I can promise you a lot of fun, and we can get something out the door. And I said, at the end of 12 weeks, we will then assess what you want to do, if this is something you want to be part of. And at the end of 12 weeks, we gel so well together. And now it's almost 2 years now. So that's how we met. It was very, it's like one of those movies. What's the name of that movie? Serendipity?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was very that kind of experience. So then the rest of the team were, one of the investors made introductions. So it's through the network of trusted people that came highly recommended, and then working together, and it's very organically grown.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, I think everyone's got those kind of weird stories. Like the first company I founded, it was the guy that gave me my first job in recruitment. And it circled back 10 years. And then we happened to find ourselves both kind of not working and going, should we do it together? And I think you find these kind of strange kind of coincidences happen. The challenge is, you know, obviously growing and going outside of that trusted kind of, you know, unit of people. So what's next for you? What's next for Coverhero? Am I right in thinking you're currently focused on Australia, but are you operating in the US already, or?
No, we have plans to expand outside of Australia in the next 3 years. There's some cool products that we're working on and growing and building our community. Building our community is a really big part of what we do, and brand partnerships. So we have a mental health awareness challenge that we're running next week, which is going to be pretty incredible. And it is to help people build awareness about anxiety and depression is not a disease and something to be ashamed of, to encourage people to talk and then build awareness around the interconnectedness of physical health and mental health and removing the stigma around it. So a lot of time I spend on brand collaborations, working with brands that have similar values and amplifying that, and building building and growing our community and supporting them. We have our thought leadership series, Hustle Chat, which is about democratization of business education.
Mm-hmm.
Is I believe entrepreneurs shouldn't have to pay to access knowledge that's out there, because there's so much knowledge out there. So it's about building the community for us, which is number one priority, and then growing the business, adding new products to our platform, and then expanding, and to be the preferred brand for the contingent workforce.
Yeah, because it's quite a heavily fought over space, isn't it? I know you've been around, or at least pitching this idea, since 2017. I think the business has been around since early 2018. But since that time, we've seen a few people kind of enter that market. But are you the kind of dominant one, or at least one of the prominent ones in Australia, particularly, or?
Yeah, we launched in January this year. The product was live, but we've been working on it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And there are new entrants coming to the market across different niches.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's such a huge segment and a growing segment, we'll be seeing a whole range of players enter the segment. And there are different players, in the UK, there is Collective Benefits, and then in Asia, and also Buckle in the US as well. So it's really great to see lots of different value propositions coming into the market. And we want to see that grow and accelerate, and find opportunities to work together with other Insurtechs in other jurisdictions, so that we can move faster together, because it's a lot easier to work with other startups that have complementary skill sets, to move at speed. And if there are established Insurtechs that we could partner and leverage to go into other jurisdictions, that's an avenue that we definitely explore.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being my guinea pig for number one, and being really, really interesting. Where can people follow up? Particularly, I was really interested to hear you about the mental health thing. Where's the best place to look for you? Is it the Hustle Chat podcast, or?
So we have a Hustle Chat podcast at 3:00 Sydney time Friday, and LinkedIn is the most reliable space to find out what I'm up to. And the details would also be on hustlecover.com website as well, and on our Facebook page. So there are multiple avenues to find out. So all the details would be up by the end of this week. And I'd encourage people to tune into the Hustle Chat podcast to learn about the activation.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being with me and spending some time with me today.
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Bye.